Oh. Huh?
Where's...
What?
And so it went for generations, although few, if any, seemed to notice.
I still remember the first time I watched Idiocracy laughing until tears streamed down my face. We always say it was prophetic. Back then, everything felt light. The stupidity was exaggerated. The characters were too over the top to be real. And there was a very clear sense of safety. This was just a comedy. We laughed because we believed we were standing outside the story. But that was only the version the studio wanted you to see. Did you know that Idiocracy once contained images suggesting that this decline did not begin with politics, but with adult behaviour? That there was a vision in which children were no longer taught to understand, only kept quiet with stimuli, strong enough to hold their attention? And that there was once a scene in the White House, which if it had not been removed, would have killed Idiocracy's laughter entirely. 10 deleted scenes, each one a crucial fragment revealing just how dark Idiocracy might have been, had audiences been allowed to see it whole. 10. The deleted sex scene, Idiocracy's most dangerous foundation. When Idiocracy begins, I once saw its opening as harmless. A quick, humorous montage explaining why future society becomes stupid educated people hesitate to have children, while simple-minded people reproduce effortlessly. Everything is framed as a clever joke. You laugh, then accept the film's rules. But that was not the original version. In an early cut, Idiocracy included a very brief scene, a couple having sex in a pickup truck. Crude, rushed, mindless. No emotion, no thought. Taken on its own, it is just a vulgar, forgettable image barely worth noticing. The danger lies here. The scene does not stand alone. It is intercut directly with the opening montage about reverse selection. And with that juxtaposition alone, the film crosses the boundary of comedy. Idiocracy is no longer merely laughing at individual stupidity. It touches reproduction, social inheritance, and human responsibility subjects. Audiences are not accustomed to confronting in a comedy. What makes the scene frightening is not sex itself, but the assumption behind it that bringing a human being into the world is not a neutral act. That the future of society is shaped not only by education or politics, but by quiet, repeated, reproductive choices for which no one takes responsibility. And that is precisely why the scene could not exist. If it remained, Idiocracy would too easily be read as implying that some people should not have children. The line between social satire and eugenic thinking becomes dangerously thin. 9. The future of education. The scene that was not allowed to exist. In Idiocracy, we still see schools. There are classrooms. There are teachers. On the surface, education seems not to have disappeared. But in a version that was never shown, the film goes much further, and that is why this scene had to vanish entirely. In the original cut, schools no longer serve to teach thinking or literacy. There are no lessons, no questions, no concept of right or wrong. Instead, children are kept in line with overstimulating entertainment, loud enough to seize attention, intense enough to keep them seated. What is terrifying is not the content itself, but its purpose. Education in Idiocracy no longer exists to develop human beings. It produces no understanding. It cultivates no thought. It serves only one function: behaviour management. Keeping young crowds from causing trouble, from asking questions, from disrupting the system. At this point, Idiocracy stops being a comedy about a stupid future. It becomes a cold accusation that a society can continue to function without intelligent citizens as long as they are obedient enough. And this is the boundary the film was not allowed to cross. Touching children is already forbidden territory. Touching education is a second taboo. Touching the replacement of education with entertainment, that is the absolute forbidden zone. If this scene had remained, Idiocracy would no longer be satire. It would be seen as a direct indictment of how society treats the next generation. A mainstream comedy cannot carry that accusation and still expect audiences to laugh along. 8. When the joke becomes too real, Camacho orders an execution. In the audience's memory, President Camacho is a comic figure. Loud, crude, showy. A caricature of power exaggerated enough that no one has to take him seriously. But in the original cut, Camacho crossed that line and the film was forced to retreat. In that version, Camacho does not merely threaten Joe to rile up the crowd. He orders Joe's execution directly on stage in front of thousands of people. No trial, no debate, no law. A human life is placed on the scale of collective emotion, and the decision is delivered amid cheers. This moment is not dangerous because of violence. It is dangerous because of its simplicity. No malice is required. No personal hatred. Just one man with power, a crowd ready to applaud, and a decision labelled necessary. In the theatrical release, the scene is softened. The execution order becomes a comedic threat. Camacho remains a joke. Joe still has time. The audience can still laugh and think everything will be fine. This change is not about avoiding graphic violence. It is about avoiding a far more dangerous realization that in the world of idiocracy, power does not need laws to kill it, only needs the crowd's permission. Had the original scene remained, Camacho would no longer be a foolish president. He would become an uncomfortably real image of violent power, shielded by collective approval. And Idiocracy would no longer be a comedy about a stupid future, but a cold reminder that such decisions are not unfamiliar. That is why the scene had to be softened not to protect Joe, but to protect the audience from realizing that they themselves have cheered for similar moments in real life. 7. Preserved corpses of culture. When values become pure form. Have you ever wondered why in Idiocracy the future society still has museums? Amid a world that is loud, crude and ridiculous, the idea of cultural preservation seems to survive, as if signalling that not everything has completely collapsed. The film skims past this quickly, just enough for you to believe that however stupid this society still maintains a shred of order, a minimum trace of civilization. What audiences never saw, however, is that this museum once existed in full, and it made the world of Idiocracy far more disturbing. In the original cut, Joe and Rita enter a museum operated with the same seriousness as any cultural institution. There are guides, explanations, a scientific objective tone. With one difference, what is displayed and honoured is farting, not as a fleeting gag, but as a heritage to be categorised, interpreted and preserved for future generations. The camera does not chase laughter. It stays still, allowing the viewer to observe the absolute seriousness of the space. No one inside the museum finds anything wrong. No one laughs. And in that moment, the most uncomfortable truth of Idiocracy is exposed. Culture has not disappeared. Only its shell remains, while its values have been completely drained. A member of the editing team later recalled that the scene lasted long enough for audiences to stop laughing. Test screenings became eerily quiet. Viewers began to understand that Idiocracy was not about a funny, stupid society, but about one that had legalised emptiness by dressing it in civilised form. That was when the studio decided to intervene. The museum scene was almost entirely removed. Idiocracy needed to be remembered as a satirical comedy, not as a cold conclusion that when culture is reduced to form-alone collapse, no longer requires violence. 6. The most dangerous moment, Joe in the White House. Near the end of Idiocracy, there was once a scene that had no intention of being funny. No dialogue, no music, no climax. A scene where if you blinked, you might think that nothing happened. Joe stands in the White House, he looks outside, and he is silent. In the theatrical release, Idiocracy ends with a false sense of relief. Joe solves the problem the system seems to start working again, and audiences can leave the theatre thinking at least things turned out okay. This deleted scene completely shatters that feeling. That moment of silence is not a hero hesitating, it is a moment of recognition. Joe understands that he is not facing a problem with a quick solution. The issue is not a few stupid individuals, not a ridiculous president. It is a system that has been accepted, maintained, and defended by society itself, by the very people living inside it. What makes this scene dangerous is that it offers the audience no safe place to stand. Joe does not speak for us. He does not lecture. He does not point toward a way forward. He simply looks, and that silence forces viewers to confront a question the film never asks directly if you were there. What would you do? If this scene had remained, Idiocracy would have ended not as a satirical comedy, but as a quiet tragedy. No spectacular collapse, no gunshots, only the late realization that not every broken system can be fixed by individual will. And that is why the scene was cut. Not because it was sad, but because it left audiences in a state of lingering unease, something a mainstream comedy is not allowed to do. Idiocracy needed laughter at the end. Joe standing in the White House did not allow that. 5. The deleted scene, when communication ends and intimacy begins elsewhere. There is a very small detail in Idiocracy that the theatrical cut never shows you. Joe's phone call does not end with a goodbye. It ends with the line being cut. Joe is speaking. His girlfriend on the other end is still responding, still producing the familiar sounds of a normal conversation. And then, without warning, the call ends. Immediately after the deleted scene shows what the theatrical version did not keep, she instantly moves to be with another man. Everything happens as a smooth, natural substitution, as if Joe had never existed just moments before. In this scene, the situation is constructed very simply. Relationships are unstable, loosely bonded, easily replaced. There is no tragedy, no complex emotion. Everything unfolds quickly, seamlessly, almost reflexively. It is precisely this normalization that creates the humor, a dry, slightly uncomfortable laugh, very much in Mike Judge's style. Ideologically, this scene is a clear continuation of the dysgenics motif running throughout Idiocracy. Thoughtless behavior in the present accumulates into social consequences in the future. Here, the film does not need to talk about intelligence or education. It chooses another path, a culture of casual, irresponsible relationships with no long-term planning. An environment where relationships are consumerist, easy to start, easy to end, requiring no commitment. Within the context of Idiocracy, this is not merely a matter of personal morality, but one link in a larger loop where having children, forming families, and building a future are no longer treated as serious decisions. That is why this scene could not exist in the theatrical release. Not because it was too shocking or too offensive, but because it exposed a dangerous connection between seemingly harmless personal choices and the broader picture of societal decline in Idiocracy. 4. The maternity ward as an assembly line. At the beginning of Idiocracy, there is a scene audiences often remember, only vaguely childbirth that is fast, crude, emotionless. The mother is wheeled into the delivery room like an administrative procedure. The baby's birth is not a moment to be awaited, but a step to be completed before moving on to the next task. The scene passes quickly enough for you to laugh and then leave it behind. But in the early cut, the feeling was far heavier. The lighting in the delivery room was cold and harsh, almost industrial. The space was arranged according to the logic of efficiency in process out. Machines occupied more of the frame than people. There was none of the confusion or panic typical of childbirth, and no tenderness either. Everything ran smoothly, precisely, and completely without feeling. What is frightening is not the speed, but the attitude. No one in that room treats childbirth as a special event. It is handled like a step in a production line. The child appears not as a new life, but as a valid output of the system. Had this version remained, Idiocracy would have stated something deeply uncomfortable. This society does not merely reproduce carelessly, it has normalized dehumanization from the very moment a person is born. Life becomes quantity. Emotion becomes an obstacle to efficiency. And that is why the scene had to be softened. The lighting was warmed, the editing sped up, the coldness was masked by jokes and comedic rhythm. The audience still sees the indifference, but not long enough to recognize it as a system. 3. Justice by shouting. The courtroom scene in Idiocracy is often remembered as one of its funniest moments. A crowd yelling, cheering, deciding a person's fate through instant emotion. It is ridiculous, loud, and absurd enough to make audiences laugh. But in the early cut, this scene was anything but light. The trial lasted longer, louder, more chaotic. The camera did not avoid the crowd, it stayed with them, letting the shouts collide and overlap without relief. The atmosphere felt closer to a medieval public execution than a futuristic joke. Justice is not mocked, it is swallowed whole. What makes this scene dangerous is how familiar it feels. No laws need to be explained. No arguments are required. The crowd only has to react. Those who are cheered live. Those who are booed disappear. The justice system is not based on truth or reason, but on the intensity of collective emotion. In the theatrical release, the scene was shortened. The editing became faster. The joke was pushed ahead of the sense of violence. Audiences could laugh at the absurdity instead of recognizing something far more disturbing, that this form of justice is not as alien as we would like to believe. Had the early cut remained, Idiocracy would no longer be a comedy about a stupid future. It would become a direct mirror, reflecting how mass power operates, where shouting replaces argument and the majority decides morality. And that is why the scene had to be softened. Not because it was too violent, but because it was too close to reality to remain a joke. 2. The IQ test. When stupidity becomes a ritual of humiliation. In the audience's memory, the IQ test scene in Idiocracy is a quick joke. Joe takes a few absurd tests, passes with ease, and is declared the smartest man in the world. The scene serves its purpose perfectly, to show that Joe is so normal he becomes a genius in a decayed society. But in the original cut, the process was anything but quick. Joe does not take a single test. He is subjected to a long sequence of meaningless, repetitive questions designed not to measure intelligence, but to test compliance. The questions lack logic. The devices are never explained. The conclusions are delivered mechanically, coldly. What is frightening is not the stupidity of the system, but its attitude. Joe is not treated as a citizen to be evaluated, but as an object through which the system displays its power. The test here is not meant to understand a human being, it is meant to place him lower, to be observed, judged, and legally ridiculed. In the longer cut, Joe begins to look more like a victim than a protagonist. The laughter no longer targets the system, but him. And at that moment, Idiocracy runs into a serious problem. The audience needs Joe to be the normal man among idiots, not someone humiliated by a meaningless system. That is why the scene was shortened. The pacing was accelerated. The repetition was cut. The focus shifted from humiliation to a comedic conclusion. Joe was restored to a safe position of empathy, rather than becoming a mirror reflecting the system's quiet cruelty. 1. The deleted line. When the film almost pointed directly at the audience. According to some members of the crew, Idiocracy once had a line at the very end. No climax, no joke, no attempt to be memorable. Just a short, cold sentence, almost unnecessary. This worked only because everyone let it happen. The line does not target any character in the film. It does not criticize a ridiculous president. It does not blame a stupid system. It points beyond the screen toward the audience. Had this line remained, Idiocracy would no longer end as a satirical comedy. It would end as a collective accusation. No one in the theatre could leave feeling outside the story. because the line erases the safe distance between us and that stupid world over there. A mainstream comedy cannot do that. Not because audiences would fail to understand, but because they do not want to be placed in the position of accomplices. That line turns Idiocracy from a story about a fictional future into a commentary on the present, where decline requires no conspiracy, only prolonged indifference. And so, the line was removed entirely. Not revised, not softened, not replaced. It simply vanished, as if it had never existed. After all those scenes that were deleted, softened and shortened, one thing becomes unmistakably clear. Idiocracy is not dangerous because it was prophetic. It is dangerous because it was once too honest. The version we see is a diluted one smoothed out so the world on screen feels stupid enough, distant enough, and safe enough. A world to laugh at, not one to hold up as a mirror. The removed scenes do not leave the film lacking. They were taken away precisely because while they existed, Idiocracy stopped being a comedy. And you, which deleted scene surprised or unsettled you the most, leave a comment below. And don't forget to like, share and subscribe to continue joining us as we explore the hidden layers behind Hollywood cinema.